I'm Juliette Monroe, 32 freelance journalist and the only daughter of Arthur Monroe, the man everyone called the Empire Builder. The room smelled like overpolished mahogany and old cigars. I stood at the edge of the funeral hall, just outside the arch of golden candelabras, watching the slideshow of my father's life unfold on a massive velvet curtained screen. Photos of him shaking hands with governors, laughing with CEOs, holding golf trophies. There were no photos of me. Not a single one. I adjusted my black dress and stepped forward. But a woman in a sharp navy pantsuit intercepted me near the front pews. She had a walkie clipped to her belt and a clipboard tucked under her elbow. "Excuse me," she said politely, but firmly. "This row is for family only." I blinked. "I'm his daughter." She glanced at the clipboard, then gave me a look that balanced skepticism and pity. "Your name isn't listed, ma'am." Behind her, my half-brother Mason caught sight of me and immediately turned back to the bishop. I watched as he whispered something that made the man nod slowly, then continue arranging the order of speeches. They weren't going to stop this. No one was. A tremor rose in my chest, the kind that feels like shame but tastes like rage. I stepped back before I said something loud. Instead, I ended up sitting near the aisle, between two strangers wearing dark designer coats. The man beside me coughed gently and shifted away. I realized I was gripping the seat too hard, like I might splinter it in half. The eulogies began, each one more airbrushed than the last. Words like visionary, provider, lion. Mason took the podium with his $1 million tie, talking about Dad's legacy, the businesses he'd inherit, the trust funds he'd protect. I felt like a ghost in the room. I'd flown across the Atlantic for this. Then the last speaker took the microphone. "I apologize for the interruption," she began, voice crisp, slightly accented. "French. My name is Sabine Leclerc, legal counsel to the late Mr. Monroe's International Holdings." Heads turned. Even Mason tilted his head like a confused wolf. "I have been instructed to deliver a sealed message, per his will, in accordance with banking regulations in the European Union. Miss Juliette Monroe, please rise." My breath caught. Slowly. I stood. Sabine walked down the aisle and handed me a narrow black envelope with a wax seal. All eyes were on me now, quiet, wide-eyed, uncomfortable. She turned to the room and added, "Let it be known that Mr. Monroe's legacy extends farther than many assumed. This will pertain to holdings not disclosed in the domestic estate." Gasps and murmurs rippled like a sudden gust. Mason froze. The bishop lowered his script. And me? I finally felt the heat of the chandeliers land on my skin, like I existed. "If you've ever been written out of something that should have been yours just because you didn't play by their rules, leave a comment or tell me where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever tried to erase you." 2. I stood in that silence, fingers curled around the envelope, and for the first time since my father's death, everyone saw me. The quiet in the room wasn't mourning, it was fear. The envelope sat untouched on my hotel nightstand for nearly 2 hours. I had stared at it through the mirror, the way a kid stares at something they're told not to touch. The wax seal was unbroken black with a faint M pressed into it. The kind of drama you think only happens in movies. But no, it was real. My name had been said out loud, in front of everyone, in front of him. I didn't go to the post-service brunch. I didn't shake hands or cry at the casket. I walked out the side entrance of the funeral hall and kept walking until the air stopped tasting like cologne and polished lies. The hotel was a boutique place in the old quarter, too expensive for someone who didn't belong in the family anymore. I booked it out of spite. Every piece of it, from the clawfoot tub to the velvet drapes, felt like revenge. Finally. I sat down and broke the seal. The letter was handwritten in dark blue ink, my father's writing, still as sharp and upright as it was when he used to grade my essays in red pen. Juliet, if you're reading this, I'm no longer around to make amends in person. I won't try to defend my choices, just know I made many mistakes when it came to you. You didn't want the company, the estate, or the fight. You wanted something I could never give while alive: recognition. What I left you is not in a will. It's not a public trust or a headline. It's a key, figuratively and literally. You'll find the bank and the account number on the card enclosed. It's in Paris. You'll understand when you arrive. I hope it makes sense someday. Maybe not now. Maybe not ever. But it's yours. No strings, no boardrooms, no Mason. I'm sorry for the silence. I never knew how to talk to you when you didn't want anything from me. Dad. There was a pause in my head. Not a dramatic music swell or an explosion of tears. Just silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. I lifted the small matte black card tucked into the paper. On it, a French address, a name, Banque de l'Étoile, and a number scribbled underneath. And a key. A physical silver key taped to the back. Not a USB, not a code. A key. And just like that, the numbness cracked. I booked a ticket that night. The flight to Paris felt longer than it was. Every minute passed like I was sitting inside a question mark. Why Paris? Why secret? Why me? At Charles de Gaulle. I didn't wait for a taxi. I took the RER train into the city like I used to when I was backpacking in college. It was strange. I remembered the exact sound the train made when it hit a turn, like metal being stretched too far. When I stepped out at Luxembourg Station, I walked. Through the heat. Through the slow-moving Parisians with scarves in summer. I didn't care that I was sweating through my blazer. The address led me to the left bank. Past the gardens. Down a street so narrow even scooters passed carefully. Finally. I stood in front of a building so old it looked like it sighed. Banque de l'Étoile Privée. No windows. Just a bronze door with a carved star. I stared at it, then knocked. A slit opened. A man's eyes looked at me calm, pale, assessing. I held up the black card and the key. Arthur Monroe. I said, I'm his daughter. He closed the slit. A click. Then the door opened with a smooth sweep. Inside was not a bank. It looked more like an old-world library. Stone walls. Low light. The smell of lavender wax and parchment. The receptionist, a woman in a charcoal dress, led me wordlessly through a hallway. No one else spoke. We stopped at a thick wooden door marked Client 713, Monroe. She motioned to the lock. You may use your key, mademoiselle. I inserted it, half expecting it wouldn't work, but it turned easily. The door creaked open. Inside, I saw a small desk, a single chair, and one wall of locked drawers. A security box, yes, but next to it, a leather folder. Thick, faintly dusted. I opened it and found pages, handwritten notes, letters, contracts, photographs, and under the final flap, a thick booklet, a foreign bank ledger. And then I saw the number, $3,840,000. My breath left me. The money didn't feel real, but what hit harder was the timeline. The earliest deposit, 1999. I was 7. The year he stopped visiting me on weekends. He'd been sending money somewhere for me since before I was old enough to understand what inheritance even was. There was no mention of it in the will. No listing of this account. No trace. He had built a secret financial life just for me, and he never told me. I took the folder with me. I asked if I could. The woman simply nodded. It is yours. Monsieur Monroe made clear instructions. The next 2 days were a blur of walking, sitting, thinking. I sat by the Seine with a baguette I never finished. I walked past bookstalls and fountains I used to visit as a girl. I kept waiting to feel joy, or closure, or some righteous glow. But all I felt was abandoned. He could have just said it to my face. He could have picked up a phone. Instead, he waited to be dead. I booked another night at a quiet hotel in Montparnasse. Cheap, simple, felt more like me. I laid out the contents of the folder on the bed and sorted through them like evidence. Letters to lawyers, instructions to accountants, a scanned birth certificate with my name under air. He'd planned this for decades, every little step. But he didn't plan to love me out loud. Not once. Still, as much as I hated the mystery of it all, there was something unmistakable about this effort. This obsession. He didn't love me publicly, but he was trying, clumsily, to make it up in the only language he understood: control. If you've ever been loved in silence, or had someone show they cared only when it was too late, drop a comment, or tell me what city you're in. Some of us aren't grieving what was lost. We're grieving what was never given. I didn't call anyone. Not Mason. Not my stepmother. Not the lawyers. I turned off my phone and slid it under the mattress like it might bite me. I wasn't ready for anyone else to own this part of the story. Not yet. Paris moved around me like a film reel, slow and golden and indifferent. I spent the morning in a cafe near the corner of Rue de Sèvres, eating warm tartines that flaked apart in my hands. I didn't even taste them. I was reading, rereading, every line in that folder, every scratched-out note, every bank signature. My father had written more about me in these documents than he ever spoke aloud in 30 years. He'd made arrangements for tuition at schools I never applied to. He had designated funds for real estate I never bought. There was even a letter dated 5 years ago that said she'll never want this. But she deserves it anyway. It felt less like inheritance and more like confession. There were photos too. One I couldn't stop staring at me. Age 10, standing on the steps of my elementary school with a green backpack and a scraped knee. I don't remember the photo being taken, but it was there, printed, and slid into a small sleeve marked Fall Term, Boston. He'd been watching. From a distance. Always from a distance. Later that afternoon, I took the metro to the 16th arrondissement. Not for sightseeing, just to walk. It's the quietest part of Paris, where the buildings look like they're sighing in French. I found a bench in a narrow park and sat until the sun slid behind the sycamores. My thoughts kept slipping to Mason. I knew he'd be furious when he found out. He always assumed the empire would be his by blood and default. I had opted out. That was my sin. I wanted nothing to do with Monroe Global after I turned 18. While he was shadowing Dad through boardrooms, I was covering factory protests in Southeast Asia for a digital magazine that barely paid my rent. It wasn't rebellion. It was survival. Mason called me the ghost daughter once. I overheard him at a fundraiser. She's off somewhere playing journalist. She'll come crawling back when she runs out of idealism. I didn't. And now I was the one holding the only piece of Dad's life that wasn't publicly declared. Not that I wanted it. I didn't even know what it was yet. But it was mine. That night, I opened my email for the first time in 2 days. 47 unread messages. One from Mason. Subject line: "You need to call me." I deleted it. Then another. From someone I didn't expect. Sabine Leclerc, the lawyer from the funeral. Her email was brief. "Mademoiselle Monroe, I hope Paris has treated you gently. If you would consider meeting, there are a few final clarifications your father entrusted to me. Nothing urgent, but important. I am available Wednesday at 11 a.m. at my office. Address below, SL. I read it 3 times, then marked it unread. I didn't like surprises anymore, but I knew I'd go. Wednesday morning was warm and pale. I wore a navy shirt and jeans, trying to look more like me than someone mourning a man she barely knew. Sabine's office was in a limestone building near the river. No plaque, just initials on the intercom SL. She answered the door herself. "Miss Monroe," she said with a nod. "Thank you for coming." Her office smelled like ink and chamomile. Sparse, but soft. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "I hope you've had time to review the contents," I nodded. "Most of them. Some I didn't know how to interpret." "That's natural," she said, folding her hands. "Your father was a precise but emotionally reticent man. He kept layers of contingency. You were always part of the plan, even if no one else knew." I hesitated. Why didn't he tell me? Sabine tilted her head slightly. "He was afraid you'd reject it. The money. The gesture. Him. He wasn't a brave man when it came to closeness." That hit harder than it should have. "Did you know him well?" I asked. "I worked with him for 14 years, she said. "I knew the version he showed to clients, but I saw more than most." "Did he ever talk about me?" "Yes," she said without pause. "Always as a kind of haunting." I didn't expect that word. "Haunting," Sabine nodded. "You were his unfinished sentence." There was a silence between us then. Not awkward, just fragile. She opened a drawer and slid across a final envelope. Not wax sealed, just a name written in black ink: Juliet. "This wasn't part of the original file," she said. "He left it with me to deliver in person. He said you would understand when the time came." I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single photo: my mother, laughing, young, flushed, sitting at a picnic table with wind in her hair. Behind her, a blurred figure I now knew was my father. His arm was reaching toward her cheek, brushing something off, on the back. He had written, "She gave you your heart. I only gave you my silence." That was it. I pressed the photo to my chest before I realized what I was doing. My mother had died when I was 16. She never said much about him, only that he had his reasons. I used to hate her for defending him. Now I understood. They both thought silence was noble. They were wrong. I left Sabine's office with the photo and a quiet storm under my ribs. I didn't go back to the hotel. I walked. For hours. Along the Seine. Across the bridges. Past lovers kissing and children chasing pigeons. I walked until the city blurred and my feet ached. And somewhere around twilight, I stopped. Right in front of a little blue bookstore tucked between two cafes. A bell rang when I opened the door. I don't know why I went in. Maybe habit, maybe fate. Inside, it smelled like old paper and dust. A woman behind the counter looked up and smiled faintly. I wandered to the biography section. My fingers trailed across spines until they landed on a book I'd read a decade ago. Fathers Who Disappear. I opened to a random page. The line I saw first was, "Some fathers vanish without leaving. Others leave everything behind, except their voice." I closed the book, holding it a moment. And then I sat in the corner chair and wept. Not loudly, not for show, not for just the kind of crying that comes when grief finally finds a name. It wasn't about the money. It was about finally realizing what I'd been missing all these years wasn't absence, it was recognition. And the worst part, he knew. The next morning, I sat at a small desk in the hotel lobby, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. The folder lay open in front of me, but I wasn't reading anymore. I was staring. It's strange how grief lingers in the body, not just the mind. My hands felt heavier. My jaw ached from grinding in my sleep. There was a dull throb behind my eyes that no amount of caffeine could clear. But I wasn't sad the way I expected. I wasn't devastated. I was, if anything, angry. Not volcanic. Not loud. a low, simmering heat, like coals you didn't know were still burning. I thought of Mason again. I hadn't responded to any of his emails. I hadn't returned his 3 missed calls. But last night, one voicemail came in just before midnight. Juliet. I don't know what the hell you did, or what that lawyer said to you, but this little stunt, it's not going to last. You were cut out of the will for a reason. If Dad wanted to give you something, he'd have done it the right way, the legal way. Call me back before I make this harder for you than it needs to be. He still thought everything had to be legal to be real. He still thought the will was the final word. But I had something better than a signature. I had proof of intention, in his own handwriting, and I was done being quiet. Later that afternoon, I walked to a copy shop and had every single document in the folder scanned, twice. I emailed one copy to myself and saved the other on an encrypted USB I kept in my purse. I left the originals in the hotel safe. I wasn't sure what I was preparing for, but something in my gut told me Mason wasn't going to back down. And then, like clockwork, the storm arrived. Just after 4 p.m., I received a legal notice unsigned, digital only from the Monroe estate lawyers back in New York. It was dressed up in polite language, but the meaning was clear. Return all materials. Cease and desist from claiming any connection to undisclosed foreign accounts, and refrain from representing myself as a beneficiary of Arthur Monroe's legacy. I read it once, calmly. Then I printed it, tore it in half, and ordered a glass of wine. That night, I sat by the window of my hotel room, legs tucked under me, watching the lights of the Eiffel Tower pulse in the distance. Paris had become something entirely different now, not a place of dreams, or postcards, or art, but a place of reckoning. A city that held my father's secrets. A city where I could finally decide how to define myself without anyone else's blueprint. I opened my laptop and began writing an email, not to Mason, not to the lawyers, to someone else. My old editor at the 5th column, the independent magazine I used to freelance for when I was 24. We hadn't spoken in years, but she had always told me I had a knife in my pen when I got angry enough to write about injustice. Subject possible essay The Daughter. He hid from the will. I hesitated before sending, but I hit send anyway, not because I wanted revenge, but because it was my story, and I was finally ready to tell it. The reply came the next morning. Juliet, if even half of what you're saying is true, we need to talk. I want 2,500 words, your voice only. No fluff. Don't sensationalize it, make it surgical. You have a right to tell the truth. Ellie. I sat back in the chair, pulse rising slightly. Surgical. That I could do. It took me 2 days. I wrote in fragments on napkins in cafes, on my phone in the back of taxis, in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. I wrote about being erased, about being watched but never held, about the money, the silence, the Paris key. I included pieces of the letter, pieces of the voicemail, even Mason's attempts to push me out again, but I didn't write it to expose them. I wrote it to explain me. The finished piece wasn't perfect, but it was raw, and mine. I sent it. Ellie published it within 24 hours. It didn't go viral. It didn't trend. But it made its way quietly through corners of the internet where people still read long-form stories. People who understood that grief isn't always about losing someone you loved. It's sometimes about realizing they never really saw you at all. The first comment under the article read, I'm a daughter too, and I didn't get a seat at the funeral either. Thank you. And just like that, I knew it was worth it. The pushback came fast. Mason sent another legal notice, this one angrier, longer, accusing me of defamation, manipulation, emotional sabotage. But the strange thing was he never denied the account existed. He never denied the Paris file. He couldn't. It was all real. What hurt him most wasn't the money. It was the fact that I had something he didn't know about, something Dad hadn't shared with him. And more than that, I had the public's ear, even if only briefly. One afternoon, I got a message through my website contact form, just a single line. You were always the real heir. S.L. Sabine. No fanfare, no legalese, just quiet validation from the one person who had seen everything. I stared at that message for a long time before deleting it. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I didn't need it anymore. On my final day in Paris, I walked to the Jardin des Plantes. My mother used to take me there when I was little. We'd sit by the rose garden and feed crumbs to sparrows. I couldn't have been older than 6 or 7, but I remembered how her laugh echoed off the stone benches. I found an empty seat and just sat. Not to solve anything, not to cry, just to breathe. And for the first time in weeks, my thoughts weren't racing. I didn't need a plan. I didn't need an angle. I didn't even need to call anyone back. I just needed a moment where I didn't have to be someone's forgotten daughter or someone else's problem to solve. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photo of my mother, the one Dad had left for me. I placed it on the bench beside me like she was sitting there, too. We stayed like that for a long time. The wind moved through the trees. A child giggled in the distance, and I let myself imagine, just for a second, that maybe they were both proud of me. Not for being perfect, but for surviving the silence. Back in New York, nothing had changed. The Monroe Building still stood like a monolith on Fifth Avenue glass, steel, and ego. I passed it in a cab on the way home from the airport, watching its slick black windows flash in and out of view like a silent warning. I didn't tell anyone I was coming back. Not Mason, not the estate lawyers. I hadn't even decided if I was staying. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had grown. It still had the same creaky floorboard near the kitchen, the same half-finished bookshelf, the same yellowing Polaroid of my mom stuck to the fridge with a chipped Paris magnet. I dropped my bag by the door and exhaled. Being back felt like walking into a dream I wasn't ready to revisit. I spent the first few hours just doing normal things: laundry, dishes, checking the mail. Among the bills and takeout menus was a thick white envelope, no return address. I opened it slowly. Inside was a printed photo of me taken at the funeral, standing with Sabine, envelope in hand. My name was scrawled underneath in red ink. You think this is over? No signature, no threat. But the implication was enough. I stood frozen for a moment, then carefully folded the photo and slid it into a drawer. They wanted me rattled, but they underestimated just how much I'd already endured. 2 days later, I got a call from Ellie. Your piece is picking up traction, she said, voice buzzing through my earbuds as I walked through Central Park. A podcast wants to interview you. Daughters Disrupted. You ever heard of it? No, I said, stopping to sit on a bench. But the name feels painfully accurate. She laughed softly. They're legit and gentle. They want to talk about how women disappear from inheritance stories. You in? I hesitated. Only if they're not expecting a headline about some secret fortune in Paris. They want your story, not the scandal. Then yeah, I'm in. The podcast interview was recorded in a quiet studio in Brooklyn. Just me, a glass of water, and a soft-voiced host named Priya. She asked about growing up with a father who was always present in headlines but never in real life, about how I learned to shrink around the family name, about what it meant to finally be seen but only in death. The last question caught me off guard. If your father were alive? She asked gently. What would you want him to hear right now? I paused. The mic was so close I could hear my own breath. I'd tell him. I began. then stopped. I stared at the table, at the place where my fingers had dug little half-moons into the wood. I'd tell him I didn't need the money. I never needed the money. I needed him to say my name in rooms I wasn't in, to defend me when I wasn't perfect, to choose me when no one else would. There was a long silence after that. Then the red light blinked off. Priya reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's going to help a lot of people," she said. The episode aired a week later. This time, it did go viral. Not because of some scandalous secret or shocking twist, but because thousands of women heard their own stories in mine. Estranged daughters, overlooked sisters, wives who'd been replaced in obituaries by the second marriage. The emails flooded in. "Your story made me call my dad after 10 years. I cried in my car for 20 minutes after listening. Thank you for giving language to something I've carried since I was 17. I was written out of my mom's will. She gave everything to her church. But I saved her voicemail too. That's the part no one can take." I replied to as many as I could. Not with advice, just with presence. Sometimes, survival is simply proof that they didn't erase you. Then Mason called. It was a Saturday morning. I was on my balcony with tea and a book I wasn't really reading. His name lit up my screen like an alarm. I almost let it ring out. But something in me said, "Face it." I answered, "Juliet." He said flatly, "Mason." I said, equally flat, "You made a mess." "No." I said, standing. "Dad did. I just opened the curtain. You embarrassed the family. You've humiliated our firm. I've had board members asking if you're going to sue for the international holdings. I haven't." I said, "Yet. I'm not interested in the company." I said, "Or you. Or the fight. I just wanted the truth." A pause. Then something sharp in his voice. "Why now?" "Because he gave me the key. Literally. And you wouldn't have let me near it if he were still alive." He was silent for a moment. Then, softer. "He always talked about you. You know. Even when he pretended not to." I blinked. "Then why did you cut me out?" "Because you left?" he said. "Because you chose to be something else. And it made the rest of us look like cowards." It was the first honest thing he'd said in years. "Well," I said, "maybe that's what this was really about. You don't deserve to be the one holding his legacy. But I am," I said, "and there's nothing you can do about it." He didn't hang up, but he didn't respond either. Eventually, the silence ended with a click. After that call, things quieted. No more threats, no more letters, just air, empty, strange, unfamiliar air, the kind that comes when a door finally stays closed. I started writing again, not just about Dad, about other stories, other women, forgotten daughters across history, erased wives from archives, artists who signed their husbands' names to be taken seriously. I pitched a series to the Fifth Column called Her Name Wasn't There. They bought it immediately. Ellie called and said, "Juliet, you've found your fire again." But it wasn't fire. It was clarity. One night, I found myself walking past my father's old townhouse on the Upper East Side. The lights were off, the windows dark, a real estate sign out front. Discreet, but clear, by appointment only. I stood across the street for a long time. No one was there to shoo me away. No one cared that the girl who wasn't in the will was now the one they couldn't ignore. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just stood there and whispered, more to myself than anyone else, "I'm still here." Back in my apartment, I took the Paris photo from the drawer and placed it on the shelf next to my mother's. Not to forgive, not to glorify, just to tell the truth. Side by side, two people who gave me opposite versions of love, and somehow, I turned both into survival. There's something about grief that lingers even when you think you've sorted it all into boxes. Even after the interviews, the podcast, the public acknowledgments, grief still showed up. Quiet, subtle, like a shadow just out of frame. Some days it was a smell-old cologne in a department store that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Other times, it was silence too long without a phone ringing, too long without anyone asking how I was. Not as a headline, but as a daughter. And sometimes, it came through dreams. In one, I was sitting across from my father at a long dinner table. The plates were empty, the glasses full. He kept trying to say something, but no words came out of his mouth. Just air, like wind passing through a flute with no music. I reached for him, but every time my fingers got close, the table stretched longer and longer. I'd wake up exhausted. I started therapy. I told no one. It felt like a small rebellion to have a part of my healing that didn't need to be broadcasted, dissected, or published. My therapist, a woman named Marisol, was older, soft-spoken, and completely unimpressed by money or names. I liked her immediately. In our second session, she asked me what I thought I really wanted from my father all these years. I said, I don't know. Maybe. To be wanted without having to fight for it. She nodded but didn't speak. It was the silence that undid me, because I realized I'd spent most of my life waiting for someone else to name me, validate me, see me. From Dad, from Mason, from the men I dated, from the editors I worked with. That's what the inheritance was never about money. It was about permission to take up space. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need to ask anymore. One afternoon, I got a letter. A real one. Not an email. Not a voicemail. Handwritten, neat cursive on thick stationery. Return address nice. France. I opened it slowly. Juliet. I hope this finds you in peace, or at least on your way there. I thought you might like to know that your father's account at Banque de l'Étoile has officially been transferred into your full legal ownership. No more restrictions, no trustees, no red tape. It is now, simply, yours. I have enclosed the final bank documents for your records. And one last thing, your father left a line in the file under optional addendum. Just 3 words. Unsigned. They read, "She is enough. That's all. Warmly, Sabine Leclerc." I reread it 4 times. She is enough. Not, she earned it. Not, she proved me wrong. Not even she is loved. But still, somehow, it mattered. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't public. But in that moment, it felt like the closest thing to peace he was ever capable of giving. With the funds now entirely mine, the possibilities felt endless and terrifying. I met with a financial advisor, someone unrelated to the Monroe family. I told them I wanted to set up something quiet, not flashy. No foundations or charities with my name engraved in gold. Just a fund that would support girls who had been written out of their own stories, runaways, estranged daughters, scholarship kids who were brilliant but invisible. I called it the Silent Inheritance Fund. Anonymous grants, no press releases, no red carpet galas. Just help. Quiet and direct. Make it permanent. I told the advisor, even if I disappear. She looked surprised. Most people want legacy attached to their money. I just smiled. My name was left out once. I'm used to being invisible. Let the work speak. Mason called again. This time, I picked up. I heard about the fund, he said, voice quieter than usual. It's unexpected. I'm full of surprises. I replied. A pause. I thought you'd use it to come after the company, he admitted. To bury me. I don't need to. I said. You'll do that on your own. It wasn't said with cruelty, just truth. Mason had always measured his worth through mirrors, his reflection in Dad's eyes, in other people's admiration, and without Dad to hold the mirror, he was floundering. "You think he ever respected me?" Mason asked suddenly. Raw. I closed my eyes. "I think he respected your loyalty to his vision, but not your silence." "What do you mean you didn't question him?" "Not once. Even when he hurt people. Even when he ignored me. That wasn't strength." "Mason, that was convenience." Another pause. Then a soft, bitter laugh. "You always were better at making things sound profound. I'm just not afraid of naming things anymore." He sighed. "So this is it? Then, we don't speak again." I looked out the window. "Not unless you have something real to say." Click. That was the last time I heard his voice. Weeks passed. Then months. Life moved in slow, gentle rhythms. I started freelancing again, not about my father, but about small stories, quiet triumphs, women rebuilding from nothing. I wrote a piece about a florist who learned botany in prison, another about a girl who fled her home with just a violin and now taught music in shelters. No one asked about my last name anymore, and that, finally, was a gift. One evening, as fall settled into the city, I stood in my kitchen barefoot, stirring lentil soup. It was raining softly outside, tapping the windows like an old friend. On the counter was an envelope addressed to me, one of many thank you notes from grant recipients. But this one caught my eye. The girl was 16. Her name was Ayla. She was in foster care. She had no family. But she'd been accepted to a summer coding program and wrote to say, "I don't know who gave me the money. But if they're reading this, thank you for seeing me, even though we've never met. I didn't think people like you existed." I smiled through the ache. People like me. I wasn't sure what that meant. But for once, I didn't flinch from the idea of being seen. Maybe I didn't need my father to name me after all. Maybe the daughter he left behind became the woman he never dared imagine. That night, I lit a single candle and sat on the floor beside the window. Rain fell in steady rhythms, the city blurred behind foggy glass. I pulled out the last photo of him, the one from the funeral brochure, and placed it beside the letter from Sabine. She is enough. For the first time. I believed it, not because he said it, because I did. It was around the end of November when I returned to Paris. Not for business, not for anything public, but for something I hadn't done in years: to be still. The city was colder now. The trees along the Seine had shed their leaves, and the wind held a sharper edge that curled into your collarbones and reminded you not everything had thawed. I didn't stay at a hotel this time. I rented a small flat near Canal Saint-Martin, modest, quiet, with creaky wooden floors and a tiny kettle that took forever to boil. I needed slowness. Every morning, I walked. No destination. Just wandered, coat buttoned high, scarf tucked tight, gloved hands deep in my pockets. The city no longer felt symbolic. It wasn't the setting of some dramatic legacy or betrayal. It was just a place one my father had trusted more than home. I started to understand why. In Paris, you could disappear gently, not into darkness, but into quiet. There was dignity here in being anonymous. I watched an old woman feed pigeons with deliberate care. I saw a young man reading poetry to himself in the middle of a narrow street, unbothered by passers-by. No one looked too long. No one questioned solitude. It was respected. So I stopped trying to do anything and just existed. One evening, I visited the bank again. Not for more documents, not for drama, just to see. Banque de l'Étoile looked exactly the same. The bronze door, the quiet hush of stone halls, the star emblem hadn't dulled. I stood outside, unsure of whether to knock. I wasn't dressed like I had been before. No blazer, No heels, just a long coat, hair in a loose braid, sneakers slightly scuffed from walking. I wasn't trying to look like anyone's heir anymore. The door opened before I could decide. "Miss Monroe," said a familiar voice. Sabine. Her hair was pinned back this time, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. "I didn't schedule a visit," I said. "You don't need to," she replied. "He made that clear. I followed her in. We didn't go to the same room." Instead, she led me to a different hallway, narrower, lined with framed photographs mostly of older men and women, some mid-laugh, others solemn, all dressed in time-worn elegance, a kind of gallery of clients, of ghosts. "Your father requested a photo of you be added," she said. "When appropriate." My breath caught. "He did." She nodded. "He left no timeline, just the instruction." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh. The man who couldn't mention my name in public wanted me memorialized on a wall full of legacy. "Do you want it included?" she asked, stopping at a blank frame. "You have the right to decline." I looked at the empty space, the absence of me. I thought of all the photos I'd taken myself over the years, smiling with sand in my hair in Costa Rica, holding a notebook outside a refugee camp in Turkey, laughing alone in a Parisian bookstore before any of this began. None of those images were for him. None were filtered through the Monroe name, and that, I realized, was exactly why they mattered. "Let me send one," I said, "but not a headshot, not some press photo. Something real." Sabine's lips curled into a soft smile. "Good. That's what he would have needed. Something real." That night, I went through old photos on my laptop. I ignored the ones with perfect lighting or makeup or expensive coats. I landed on one a friend had taken in Vietnam. Years ago. I was crouched on the edge of a rice paddy, scribbling notes in a weather-worn journal, hair in a messy bun, pants muddy, eyes squinting into the sun. That was the woman I'd become when no one was watching. That's the one I sent. A week into my stay, I met someone. Not romantically, not dramatically, just humanly. His name was Mark, a bookseller who ran a tiny shop with a crooked door that stuck when it rained. I found it by accident, ducking in from the cold. The smell inside hit me like a lullaby ink. Cedar. Time. Mark was in his 60s, wore thick cardigans and corduroy pants, and spoke English better than he let on. We talked about books. That first day, we spoke about Marguerite Duras and the ache of memory. He handed me a used copy of The Lover, its spine worn, cover soft at the edges. "You carry memory the way Duras carried smoke," he said. I didn't know how to respond, but I came back the next day, and the one after that. We rarely talked about our lives, just literature, language, the quiet facts of being, but something about his stillness helped me understand what I'd been missing, not just from my father, but from the noise of my life. Presence. Gentle, unassuming presence. One day, as I was leaving, he handed me a slip of paper. On it, a single line. "To be seen without being performed, this is the rarest gift." It was attributed to no one. I didn't need a name. Back in the flat that night, I found myself writing again. Not for publication, not for anyone else. Just pages and pages of unfiltered memory about my mother's garden, my father's absence, the first time I learned to lie to protect myself. I wrote about the feeling of being looked at but not seen, about what it means to reclaim a story that's been told without you. I didn't write to finish anything. I wrote to breathe. The next morning, I took those pages to the canal and tore them into strips, let the wind catch them, let the water take them. Not in some symbolic ritual, not for closure, just because I could. And it felt good. Not powerful, Not righteous. Just mine. My last day in Paris. I visited my father's name at the American Expatriate Memorial Wall in Montparnasse Cemetery. I hadn't meant to go, but my feet led me there. His name was etched in stone alongside others writers, businessmen, soldiers. No mention of family, no mention of legacy. Just Arthur Monroe, 1954-2023. I ran my fingers across the letters, cold and precise. I forgive you. I whispered, not because he asked, but because I didn't want to carry him like a wound anymore. At the airport, waiting to board, I scrolled through my emails, dozens of responses to my writing series. A new one had just been published, The Daughters Who Stay Quiet. And then, tucked between the alerts and newsletters, a new message from Sabine. Your photo has been placed on the wall. Beside his. They don't match, but they speak. I smiled. That was enough. Enough for this chapter. Enough for me. It was winter by the time I returned to New York. Not just by the calendar, by the air. The kind of cold that crept through the seams of your coat, slipped between your fingers, reminded you to brace yourself even when you were standing still. I stepped out of the taxi and stood on the curb outside my building for a moment, suitcase in hand, watching my breath cloud in front of me. This city had a way of swallowing even the most profound transformation, of forcing everything back into motion like nothing ever happened. But I wasn't the same person who had left. Not the woman who stood outside her father's funeral feeling invisible. Not the daughter who'd once hoped for a phone call that never came. Now, I didn't need anyone to hand me permission. I buzzed into the building, climbed the stairs, and opened my apartment door to the familiar creak and the faint smell of cedar from the candles I'd left behind. Nothing had changed here either, except the woman crossing the threshold. I dropped my bag and stood for a moment in the silence. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. That first week back, I did something unexpected. I took all the framed photos off my shelves and laid them out on the floor. Me, Mom, the few grainy pictures I had of Dad, the snapshot from Paris, even the photo Mark had taken of me outside his shop the day before I left, holding the lover and laughing. Then, I added something else. A handwritten note. 4 words. This was always mine. I framed it and put it at the center. Ellie called on a Thursday morning. I was still in my robe, nursing a second cup of tea and avoiding my inbox. Hey, she said, voice bright. You sitting down? No, I said, smiling, but I will be. I sank into the armchair by the window. The 5th column just got picked up for a docu-series. She said, streaming platform deal. They want to feature your inheritance piece, interviews, reconstructions, the whole thing. My stomach fluttered, but not the way it used to. No sharp ambition, no desperate need to be seen. Just quiet surprise. They want me to rehash the funeral I asked. Not like that, she said. They want the emotional angle, the silence, the Paris file. You, your voice. I hesitated. Then, only if I get to own the narrative, not some sensational rewrite. Of course, she said. They'll follow your lead. I didn't say yes right away. I told her I needed a few days. That night, I walked down to the Hudson, wind slicing across the water, lights blinking on the Jersey side like distant echoes. I stood by the railing and let the air hit my face. I thought about my father's silence, my brother's anger, my own absence from every photo album and dinner table. I thought about what I'd taken back, not just money or name or access, but voice. My story. A year ago. I might have done the docu-series for revenge or recognition. Now, I only wanted to do it if it gave other women the courage to name what was taken from them. So I said yes. The first filming session was in a small studio downtown. Minimal lighting. No makeup team. Just a single chair. A mic. And the sound of someone clicking record. "Where do you want to begin?" the director asked. A soft-spoken woman named Lila. I looked into the camera and didn't flinch. "At the funeral," I said. Then I told it all again. Only this time, I didn't stumble. I spoke slowly, clearly, carefully, like I was telling it to the girl I used to be. The one who sat at birthday dinners watching her father toast someone else's child. The one who stood outside the boardroom while Mason talked about the family and left her name behind. I didn't cry on camera. But when I left the studio and stepped out into the cold air, I realized something strange. I didn't need to cry anymore. Weeks passed. Then spring inched its way into the city. The corners of sidewalks bloomed with tulips. Cafe tables returned to the streets. The grief faded into something softer still there. Still real, but no longer sharp. One afternoon, I got a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Just block letters that read, "Monroe Legal Estate." Final resolution. I opened it slowly, expecting more legal drama, but it was short. This letter confirms that all disputes regarding the international holdings of Arthur Monroe have been officially closed. No further claims will be pursued. You are no longer under review. No additional contact will be made. That was it. No signature. No apology. Just silence. Once again. But this time, the silence didn't sting. It felt like closure. I placed the letter in the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath the Paris ledger and the letters from Sabine. I wouldn't need to open it again. One day, I ran into Mason. It was unplanned. We were both at the same gallery opening in Chelsea, an exhibit about legacy and inheritance. Ironic, in a way that made me exhale through my nose. He was standing by a sculpture of a fractured bronze crown. Alone. No wife, no PR team. Just him. In a navy coat too sharp for the weather. He saw me. I nodded once. To my surprise, he walked over. We stood side by side in silence, staring at the crown. He spoke first. "Congratulations," he said. "I saw the trailer for your doc." "Thanks," I said. "Didn't expect to see you here." He shrugged. "Neither did I." Another pause. "I read your piece," he said. I turned to look at him. "And you didn't lie," he said. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest I'd ever get. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe just more tired. "I hope it helped," he added. "It did," I said. "Not because of the money, because it ended something." He nodded slowly. Then, almost too quietly, "He kept you separate because he was afraid you'd be better." I blinked. He told me once, "Juliet sees through things I pretend not to." It was the first time I ever heard Mason say something that sounded like love, and for the first time in years. I didn't hate him. I didn't want to make him hurt. I just wanted to go on. We parted ways after that. No hug, no contact info exchanged, just two people who had both inherited something broken and survived it. A few months later, I moved. Not far. Just to a different apartment, with bigger windows and a tiny balcony full of plants I kept forgetting to water. I painted the walls a warm cream and lined the shelves with books. Not awards, not frames, just books. One day, I opened a small box I hadn't unpacked yet. Inside was the envelope with the wax seal, the original letter, Dad's handwriting, still crisp, still upright. "You'll understand when you arrive." I held it for a moment, then folded it, gently, and placed it in a drawer I rarely used, not to forget, but to finally let go. I still write. I still get messages from women who see themselves in my words. I still walk past buildings where I was once denied entry. But now, I don't flinch. Now, when someone asks, "Are you Arthur Monroe's daughter?" I answer with a smile. No, I'm Juliet Monroe. I wrote my own name, and they nod, because now they know who I am, and so do I.